Poland's prime minister says an object that came down on eastern Poland overnight appears to have been a Russian missile. That has since been confirmed by NATO. Authorities found a crater and scattered debris in a field following Russian airstrikes on neighboring Ukraine. It was the latest in a series of airspace incursions in countries on NATO's eastern flank that have fueled fears of the war in Ukraine spilling over.
An object explodes in a field in eastern Poland, captured on CCTV. It leaves behind a crater and scattered debris. The Polish military says the object entered its airspace in the early hours of Thursday. For residents living near the Ukrainian border, it was a night unlike any other.
I got up and went to the balcony. I didn't know what was happening. The sirens were going off one after another.
It sounded like a plane flying over the apartments.
Poland's prime minister said the object that landed in the field appears to have been a Russian missile.
According to military experts, the vast majority of the evidence, including the fragments found, point to a Russian Ch-101 missile. This is a cruise missile. It is, of course, capable of carrying payloads, and it is also highly likely that an explosion occurred. The size of the crater, approximately 10 meters in diameter and up to 5 meters deep, or even deeper, shows that this was a very serious incident.
The incident occurred during a massive Russian missile and drone attack on Ukraine. Explosions were reported from Kiev to western Ukraine. The attacks killed at least 8 civilians and injured dozens. Ukraine says Russia launched more than 70 missiles and over 200 drones overnight.
Let's take a closer look at the incident in Poland with our Brussels correspondent Terry Schultz. Terry, what is NATO saying about the incident?
As was mentioned, Nicole, NATO was the first to confirm that this was a Russian missile. Of course, that was the suspicion, but this was the first statement that we had a few hours ago that certainly pinned it on Russia. You know, there have been many incidents where drones that happened to be Ukrainian were pushed or somehow strayed into Polish and other NATO airspace. But this is the first time that a Russian missile has actually landed in NATO territory. So that, of course, does cross a line, so to speak, and that's why there is so much concern. Now, what the NATO military headquarters spokesman, Colonel Marty O'Donnell, said was that the Supreme Allied Commander, Alexis Grinkowicz, had been in contact with NATO and had been in contact with Poland and assured them that everything that NATO can do is being done to keep air defenses on alert. They also confirmed that it was actually 2 F-16s that went into the air when this missile was noticed, as well as an early warning aircraft and a refueling aircraft and another helicopter. So there certainly was a large response, but evidently they simply couldn't catch the missile with the warning time that they were given, Nicole.
Is there any evidence, Terry, that Poland was deliberately targeted here? And do you expect the Polish government to raise the issue at NATO headquarters there in Brussels?
There certainly isn't any evidence that this was a purposeful targeting, because no one would like to think that Moscow would do that, would purposely invite war with NATO, and that's what it would be if they start targeting NATO countries. And this isn't simply a missile that went off track. It is of very high concern, but it's not the same thing as a deliberate targeting, obviously. So what we expect Poland to do is actually not to raise Article 4 consultations. That's one level below Article 5, of course, when the alliance could be called to go to war. And it does happen when a country feels that its territorial integrity or sovereignty is at stake. And we don't see any signs that Poland is going to do that over this incident. If lives are lost on the ground, of course, it's another degree of concern, but that didn't happen in this case.
For a really long time now, Terry, Poland and other eastern flank countries have been asking NATO to step up its air defense. Would you expect to see any changes after this most recent incident?
I wouldn't actually think so. I think that NATO is probably reassuring Poland and the other eastern flank countries of what they already have in place. Now, after this incident back in September, when some 20 drones crossed into Polish territory, which was definitely considered a deliberate act, NATO launched what it calls Eastern Sentry, and that is a mission to upgrade and take new assessment of what air and missile defense capabilities it already has stationed along the border. They didn't add a lot of new resources, but they certainly put everything they have there on high alert. At the same time, if you're Polish citizens, even if you're the Polish government, I can understand how you would be asking questions about how this missile was not intercepted, with NATO having what it says are the highest level of protection along the eastern flank. So I think there are a lot of questions to be answered, but I don't expect that we'll see a lot of new resources deployed along the eastern flank at this time.
Teri Schultz in Brussels. Thank you. Always great to have your insights.
Thank you.
Let's keep talking about this and bring in Thomas Withington. He's an associate fellow at the Royal United Services Institute in London. Welcome, Thomas. Now, first up, I'd like to get your reaction on this Russian missile coming down in Poland.
Thank you very much for having me. I think the most important thing to bear in mind at this point was that there was no loss of life, thank goodness. The concerning thing is, though, that these incidents have happened in the past. As Terry's package said just now, we had the incident in Poland in September last year. I was actually in that part of Poland when that incident occurred on my way to Ukraine. And as long as the war continues in Ukraine, there is the risk of these munitions straying into NATO territory. And heavens forbid, but potentially doing damage to buildings or worse. So it is a concerning incident, although on this occasion there was no loss of life or injury.
Yeah, the Polish Prime Minister says there's really no reason to believe that Poland was the target. But what does it say about Russia's grip on the situation that these incursions into NATO territory keep happening?
That's a good question. I mean, they shouldn't be happening. That's the first thing. It says a lot about, I think, Russian fire discipline in terms of the missile attacks, in terms of airstrikes more generally, that munitions are going astray and landing in NATO territory. The Russian government, of all people, must realise the risk that that inherently brings and the danger of miscalculation. And the fact that this does happen indicates that they're either do not take that risk seriously, or that's a risk they're prepared to take in order to continue with their occupation of Ukraine and the ongoing aggression that Russia continues in that country.
Last night, Russia launched attacks on cities across Ukraine. At least 8 civilians were killed. How long can Moscow keep up the almost daily bombardment?
Well, firstly, Russia's losing the war. I think everybody knows that. Russia cannot win this war. Ukraine can achieve victory. I genuinely believe that. The problem is that Russia can probably continue these attacks as long as she wishes, but it does not mean she is going to be victorious. The end of this conflict for Russia will be one of humiliation, and it will be a grave failure. And there is no amount of air attacks that can change that. As I mentioned in my response to your earlier question, I've had the privilege of being in Ukraine on a number of occasions. I've spoken to members of the civilian population there. I myself have experienced airstrikes. And the one thing I can guarantee to you is it does not shake the resolve of the Ukrainian population. In fact, if anything, it probably makes it even more implacable. So I think in many ways, these airstrikes are sort of the last desperate attempt, the last roll of the dice, or one of the last roll of the dice for Russia to try and stay in this conflict. But I think there's an inevitability that Moscow has effectively lost this war.
You seem very optimistic, and as did Donald Tusk in a way today. He said that the next 100 days may decide the outcome of this war, and it's a 50-50 chance. You say this is inevitably going to end in a Russian humiliation. I'd like to know, A, what makes you so certain, and B, does that equal the just peace that Ukraine is seeking?
It's a really good question. 50-50, as Mr. Tusk said. I mean, yeah, I think I wouldn't necessarily like to put a percentage figure on it, but I think there's a number of things that do point to Russia's inevitable defeat, first of which Russia can no longer capture ground in any meaningful capacity. So at best, Russia can try and hang on to the territories that she occupies in Ukraine. But I think the ability to do that over the long term gets weaker and weaker by the day. All it takes really is two determined Ukrainian drives into Russian territory and encirclement of one or two major Russian positions, and Russia's defeat in the land war will be all but inevitable. In terms of the other factors, I think, that are at work is Russia's internal situation. The situation is just getting worse for Mr. Putin by the day. There's clearly domestic disquiet. The Ukrainian attacks are not going to stop. So I think that's another calculation here. And a just peace for Ukraine at the end of the day is her territories, with Russia expelled from her territories. So I think that's what victory looks like, I guess.
That was Thomas Withington. Thank you so much for all those insights.
Thank you.
All right, I want to bring in now Domitilla Sagramoso. She's an expert on Russian foreign and security policy at King's College London. Domitilla, it's good to have you with us. As it stands now, there is no reason to believe that this crash on Polish soil was intentional. But Poland is a NATO member. So what does this mean for how Warsaw will probably respond?
Yes, I think what is interesting is that the Prime Minister of Poland said that this was an unintended attack. So it's clear that he's trying to lower the temperature and not sort of start some kind of retaliation. So I think this is really part of the way in which NATO countries have generally responded. Mm-hmm. They don't want to escalate the tension. They don't want to get involved directly in the war. What they do try is to see if they can, to a certain extent, shoot down the incoming missiles, which is not this case, or the incoming drones, as happens in for example, in Romania. But at the same time, to see if they can help and support Ukraine. I mean, that's what the Prime Minister of Poland said. This idea that they have to cooperate more closely with Ukraine and support Ukraine with air defense systems so that the missiles are hit previously, so that the defense system operates already in Ukraine. But this is clearly a very serious violation. Mm-hmm. It is, to me, it is not clear whether this is some kind of signaling or whether instead it is, as the Prime Minister of Poland noted, just a sort of an unexpected and inadvertent attack, which is not intended to send any clear message to Poland or to NATO as an alliance.
It looks like last night Russia used a North Korean missile in Ukraine for the first time this year. What can you tell us about the extent of military cooperation between these two countries?
Yes, well, in contrast to what happened in Poland, where luckily the missile, hit just the land and nobody was injured, there was a massive attack on a building in Ukraine, and apparently many members of a single family were killed. And that was a result of apparently a North Korean ballistic missile. And this clearly indicates that there might be, again, tighter cooperation between Russia and North Korea over, short-range ballistic missiles, which has occurred in the past. The Hwasong 11A, 11B short-range ballistic missiles have been used in the past. But the problem with these missiles is that they're not very accurate. And this maybe explains why we had this hit in a residential building. But we must remember that North Korea and Russia have developed very tight military cooperation. North Korea has been a substantial provider of artillery to Russia. Also in the past, as I mentioned, short-range missiles and also manpower. North Korean soldiers have been fighting Ukrainian troops that had entered Russian territory in the area around Kursk. And a few days ago, I think President Zelensky also noted that maybe around 30,000 North Korean soldiers might be coming in fight together with Russians in the coming months. So this clearly indicates that there is sort of a new potential pipeline of missiles and of weaponry coming in, which is a very concerning development.
Domitilla Sagramoso, as always, we appreciate your time and your analysis tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.